Greetings all, and welcome to Lucas Sprues, and another inbox review of a FW190 in 1/72nd scale. This time we're taking a look at the Academy FW190 D-9, and we'll be seeing how this aircraft compares to the Italeri and the IBG D models, which I've previously done inbox reviews for. So starting out with the front of the box, we have the usual painted style from Academy's artwork of the time, with a FW190 from JV44, better known as, and excuse my poor German, the Papagei Staffel. And we can see it's flying over a German airstrip, defending it from some P-47s there, so kind of showing off their role of airfield defense. Pretty typical with Academy's titles on the top there of the kit type, and then a few little mentions of some details included, like the early and the later Galland type canopy included, fully engraved panel lines and rivet detail, highly detailed cockpit interior and landing gear bay, and then we've just got Academy's logo in the top there. Then on the bottom here, we've got some pictures of a finished example of the model with the really obvious red undersides there showing, and you can see some of the nice little details here and there on the kit and get a bit of inspiration. Nothing but a repeat of the box art on the sides there, and then on the top here we have various warnings in different languages, mentioning that this kit contains one model, there's no paint and glue included, and it's suitable for kids ages 8+, with a scale of 1/72nd. Opening the box up, as far as I'm aware, it's pretty much brand new and had never been opened before, even though it is a second-hand kit. But we've got the instructions, a single bag here containing all of our plastic parts, plus a second bag inside there with our clear parts. And at the bottom here, we have our decals, which I popped open a little bit earlier to have a look at. But they're looking in pretty good condition. So let's have a look at the instructions first, and then we'll have a look at the rest of the kit. So having a closer look at the instructions, on the front we've just got a repeat of the box art in black and white, which looks pretty nice. And then we've got a nice bit of history in various languages about the development of the FW190D series with the new inline engines. And opening things up, unfortunately it's in the fold-out format, which I'm not a huge fan of, although you can always kind of fold them over like this to make things a bit easier. I find they take up a bit too much space and prefer booklets normally. But on the first page on the inside, we've got a few tips if you're brand new to model making or want to remind yourself of some of the basics. Then we've got our key down the very bottom here about, cement this part, don't cement this part, and the various other little things that you might need to do for the assembly. Then we've got a paint guide here, which sort of extends out. And I believe that they don't have any color codes, they simply just have a name for each of the colors. Although for the RLM colors, it seems that they have included the codes there, so at least for those tricky German colors, you should be able to find equivalents by using the proper codes there. First stage of assembly, we've got the cockpit, which is pretty typical in this scale. You've got a tub here, which appears to have some nice raised details on the sides, and then the bottom of the instrument panel, plus you're adding in the joystick and the seat. At this stage, you're also assembling the engine, which appears to have a front cowling piece, and then there's a propeller with two parts for the spinner, a base and then the front. And to hold the propeller in place, you've got this little kind of locking nut. So if you don't glue the propeller shaft to the engine cowling and instead just glue it to the piece at the back here, you should be able to rotate the propeller. Then once you've done that, you can add the instrument panel and cockpit inside of the fuselage halves there and join them. And then you've got the front part of the cowling and the top one here to add, along with the two horizontal stabilizers. As you can see, it's reasonably easy to see what you're supposed to paint everything just by using those smaller triangles. And then you've got the part number clearly laid out, so it seems pretty easy to follow. Turning over the page, the next step is assembling the wings, which have two parts for the upper surface and then a single part here for the lower one. Once you've done that, you can add that onto the fuselage, so pretty simple there. I also missed that we've got another few set of keys here, so you've got to be careful you don't miss any of those. Although I don't think any of these are going to be required for this kit, because generally you don't add weight for a tail dragging aircraft, it's more for a tricycle undercarriage. But anyways, for step 5, we've then got our landing gear assembly, which consists of the main strut plus this extra little one here. And you're basically adding that onto the landing gear doors and then adding the wheel onto that. And it's the same for both sides, just with different parts. And once you've done that, you can add them onto the underside of the wings. And we've got some little cannon barrels, the pitot tube, and various other little antennas to add as well. And finally, for the last page of assembly, we've then got our canopies. So as it mentions, you've got the option for either the early kind of flat style or the later Galland kind of bulged canopy there. And it looks like for each variant, you've also got slightly different headrest setups there, One of them is more of the framework style, and the other one's got a little bit more of a structure to it at the back there. So which one you're using, I believe, is going to depend on which scheme you're doing. Although it looks like in these pictures, both of them have the gallant kind of style canopy. Once you've done that, you can then add the fuel tank to the underside of the aircraft. I don't believe you had to drill anything out for that one. Oh, no, you did. So yeah, if you wanted to add the fuel tank, you had to drill out the holes on the underside of the wing there. But once you've done that, you can also add the intake here for, I believe, the supercharger unit. And that's pretty much it for assembly. Our two schemes included are both from JV44. So the first one we've got is from Munich, Rhein in Germany in the spring of 1945. No specific pilot or any other details mentioned, and it appears to be done in the late war kind of greens of RLM 83 and 82. I believe RLM 83 is actually a bit of a questionable color, and it might have actually been a more navy kind of blue color. So I think you might want to do a little bit more research if you want to get it more accurate. But the rest of the aircraft's got RLM 76, which came in two variants at the later stages of the war, either more of a blue or a yellow one. Although it's pretty common to see both variations on the same aircraft. And the underside of these aircraft for this squadron were all painted red with the white stripes, which I believe was mainly done so that the Luftwaffe gunners would not shoot at their aircraft, because they were starting to get into the habit of shooting anything that flies, because, well, the Luftwaffe sort of didn't exist too much at the end of the war. And finally, for the second scheme, again, it's from JV44, and it's from, and excuse me again, but I think Einring Airfield, and it's from around about May 1945. Again, it's got RLM 83 and 81 is the other colour, plus we've also got mention of RLM 75, so the kind of earlier greyish colour that was used more commonly during the middle of the war. Once again, red undersides with the white stripes. And apart from the numbers and a bit of a difference in camouflage patterns, they're pretty similar aircraft, and as mentioned, from the same squadron. And that's pretty much it. We do actually have a sprue map on the very back here, although, as you can see, it's a pretty simple kit, so you're probably not going to get too lost finding parts. So the instructions are pretty decent. They could be a little bit more cleanly organised and in colour, but they're pretty typical from Academy at the time, and they're still perfectly readable, especially since it's a relatively simple looking kit. Moving on to the plastic parts, we'll open up the main bag here. So we'll start off with this sprue here, which contains our fuselage halves. And as you can see, as it mentioned on the box, everything has been done in recessed detailing for the panel lines and the access hatches. And there are a few little rivet details here and there, like on the tail and around the horizontal stabilizers. We've also got our cockpit tub here, which actually looks pretty good. Typical for Academy at the time, you've got all these raised details which you can dry brush and get a nice bit of detail out of. Although it is a little bit more simple compared to some of the more advanced kits, it still looks pretty passable. We've then got our spinner here with a, I believe they had a cannon of some kind on most 190s coming through the propeller spinner there, and you can see the hole for that one there. Plus we've then got the locking nut and then the base of the propeller spinner there. We've got our seat here, which looks really kind of small for 1/72nd scale. Some of the other 190 kits that I have done have pretty similar size of seats, but I think this is a tiny bit smaller. But it still looks pretty accurately shaped, even if it is a bit basic. We've got our supercharger intake halves here, and they are pretty cleanly done. They're fully drilled out there, so that looks pretty good. We've then got the top part of the engine cowling cover there with the machine guns, and it looks pretty good as well. Pretty cleanly molded with some recessed details, including the little access tabs on the side there. Fuselages we've already kind of looked at, but apart from the recessed details, we've also got raised exhausts, which are pretty nicely done actually. They look quite nice and deeply molded in there. Although there isn't any exhaust holes drilled out, you could do that if you wanted. And the tail wheel is actually molded to the left fuselage, which is a little bit unusual. In most of the other 190 kits, they come separately. But it looks pretty detailed and pretty solid, so that looks okay. Not much detail on the inside. There's basically just some little parts here to help line up the cockpit assembly, but there wasn't too much detail anyways in the 190 sidewalls. It's mainly on these side panels. And all of the ejector pin marks are on the inside here, and they don't look like they're going to get in the way of assembly, and they're all out of sight, which is great. And lastly in this corner we've got our engine cowling with the radiator details, which looks pretty decent. I don't think you see too much because the propeller blades are quite thick, but you can see a little bit of those radiator kind of inlets, and they're raised on this kit, so they don't look too bad. And then we've got some recessed details and some slight raises for the engine cowl flaps there, so that looks pretty good. Again, typical for Academy, you've got raised details for the instrument panels. I don't think they've got a decal included, so you basically have to just dry brush or use some other techniques to get the most out of these parts, which I don't mind doing, but I know it can be a little bit fiddly. And lastly, we've got our seat kind of back covers, and it looks like they're going to need a bit of a cleanup because you've got to remove some ejector pin marks. Plus, there is a bit of a seam line kind of running down the middle of them, and they are kind of awkwardly positioned on the sprue where the attachment points are. But with a little bit of careful cutting and some cleanup, you should be able to get something nice out of them. Now, it appears we have got a part that's come off the sprue, so I might have a quick look for it now, but it is part 16, which, according to the sprue map, is our propeller. So I'll see if I can locate that one. Okay, it is amongst these sprues here, which we'll have a look at next. But as you can see, propeller, not too bad. There is a little bit of a flash on the edges of the blades there, but nothing too serious. A little bit of light sanding, and that should come out quite nice. On this sprue here, we've got our upper wing halves, which have recessed details with a few little rivet details as well, which look pretty good. Plus, they've done, looks like a kind of recessed section with raised bumps for the control surfaces. I believe on the late 190s they were done in metal, so I'm not sure if these are 100% accurate, but I'll have to have a look when I'm building the model and see if they are in fact the correct ones. Same story for the elevator. There's a recessed line for some of the very basic panel work that's present, plus a recess for where the elevator meets the horizontal stabilizer, and once again those kind of fabric kind of looking recesses when I think they were metal. We've got our landing gear bay doors, which are a little bit thicker than some of the newer kits we've seen, but still pretty good. Not much detail on the inside, just some raised kind of bumps there, or lines, but on the outside there's a little bit of recessed and raised detail for rivets and such. And then we've got our control column here, which doesn't look too bad, along with our radio antennas, the attachment point for the drop tank, and then we've got the drop tank itself, which again looks pretty nice. For the final grey plastic sprue here, we have the underside of our wings plus our landing gear. So the underside here looks really quite nice. They've done a really great job getting all those recessed details in there. Again, it's got the questionable surface details for the ailerons, but not too bad. The flaps look pretty good. They've done some of the little hinges there, which look good. Various little access ports as well with the rivet details, all looking quite fantastic. They haven't fully done out the holes here for the ejector ports for the cannons in the wings, but you could probably drill those out if you so wished. And as for the interior of the landing gear bay, I think they've done a pretty nice job considering the time and age of this kit. I think on most 190s you could actually basically see through to the engine because there wasn't much in the way here, but in this kit it's sort of a solid plastic wall there to give it strength. And then you've got sort of these recessed details for the interior framework and the detailing for the wheel well doors. Plus we've got a little bump here for the cannon. So not quite as detailed as some newer 190 kits, which sort of mold these parts a little bit more separately to get more detail. But honestly, I think it still looks pretty good considering the age of the kit. Then we've got our wheels here, which actually look really quite nice. They've got some raised rivets and bump details for the inner part of the hub there. And then they've got some recessed details for the tread pattern, which looks pretty good. We've then got some various parts for the landing gear and some cannon barrels there. They're a little bit more basic than perhaps what you'd find on newer kits, but still look pretty good. Apart from a small sink mark on this joint that attaches to the main landing gear struts, they look actually pretty decent. And then the main landing gear struts also look pretty good with a few little raised details here and there. And finally we've got our little pitot tube there, which again looks pretty decent. The final sprue to have a look at is our clear parts, so I will pop these open as well. And interestingly, we've actually got not only the separate types of canopy, but we've also got two separate front window parts, which is pretty rare. Most 190 kits seem to only come with the two types of the rear section, but only one front. So that's kind of nice that you've got a spare in this kit if you make a mistake or need a replacement for another aircraft. That's definitely going to be handy. But the canopies themselves actually look really quite nice. There doesn't appear to be too many or any scratches or imperfections at all. And despite the rather curved shapes, the distortion on them is not really too bad. Although one thing I have noticed is the attachment points are a little bit of a letdown on this kit. As you can see on the side here, there's sort of these square kind of distortions, and it appears to be present on both canopy styles, which is a bit of a shame because otherwise they looked really quite excellent. I've also noticed the attachment point's really quite close to this front windshield here, so I don't think you're going to be able to get that cleanly off, so you might have to do a fair bit of cleanup if you're going to use these canopies. Initially they looked pretty good, but I think from closer inspection they aren't really the best just because of how they're designed. But at least the distortion on them isn't too bad, so you probably could just get away with using them, although probably better to replace them if possible. And finally, we have our decals here, which despite this kit possibly being a couple years old, are still in pretty good shape. I don't usually have any issues with Academy's older decals, although sometimes the print quality on them is not as good as newer ones, and you can see on some of the smaller text there is a little bit of distortion, but honestly, everything looks still pretty readable. Even some of these smaller kind of common stencils actually look pretty decent, so on the whole, I'd say they're going to be pretty good. And you can see we've got a few different roundels and types depending on which scheme you're doing, plus we've got the red 13 or the red 1 or blue 1. I think you've got an option in this kit, so either you could do blue or red, and I think that might just be a little bit of not quite sure what was the aircraft's original colour. We've also got the little squadron, I believe, symbol here, and I'm guessing that the red and the black circle distinguishes the different wings or groups or something, perhaps. And we've also got our white stripes there. I'd say you're probably going to be better masking off and painting them just because there's a lot of clear segments on these decals here, which could easily silver. And there's also quite a lot of fiddly sections for around the landing gear doors and all of that, so I would say you're probably better off painting it by hand. But if you did want to use decals, there is the option there as well. And all of the common stencils are quite nice looking as well. So it looks like decals are pretty good, especially considering the age of this kit. So that pretty much wraps up our look at Academy's FW190 D9 in 1/72nd scale. So I believe they did basically two main releases of this kit. One which is this one with the JV44 markings, and then another one with some more various options for decals. So I reckon this is still a pretty decent kit, even though it has got a few flaws and some basic areas due to the age of the tooling. I'd probably put it in between the Academy and the IBG 190s in terms of detail. It looks like a pretty decent improvement over the Italeri kit, but definitely nowhere near as good as the more premium IBG ones. I also want to have a look at the Tamiya kit at some point, so I may see if I can track an example down, and I do believe they're also pretty readily available, but unfortunately it seems that this kit is starting to, at least in Australia, become less available. I've only seen them available secondhand, and obviously that's where I got mine, as I mentioned. I bought it off of a friend for about 15 AUD, which I think is a pretty good price for this one, in fact probably a bit of a bargain. And I've seen it going from anything from 20, which I think is pretty reasonable, to 30 AUD, which I think is starting to get pretty steep. Especially when you've got the IBG kit, which is only a couple of dollars more, but a lot more detailed. So if you can find one for a decent price, and you don't mind that it's a bit more of a basic build, I'd say this is a pretty decent looking kit. Otherwise, though, you're probably going to want a more detailed one like the IBG kit, but for the most part, still looks like a decent kit, and I'm very much looking forward to having a build of it, and maybe 3D printing some parts to upgrade it a little bit, and vacuumforming some canopies to replace some of those parts that aren't quite as good on this kit. Thank you very much for watching this video. I do hope you enjoyed it and got something out of it. If you did, please be sure to leave a like, and also subscribe to the channel. And if you want to help fund my inbox reviews, build videos, and stop motions, then please check out my Patreon page. A massive thank you to all of my wonderful current patrons who helped to fund not only buying this kit, but also the products I use when I make them and the time I spend making these videos. I'll be doing a build video on this one at some point, and I'll also be doing one for the IBG and the Italeri kits, which I've just started to sort of prepare for. I've done a poll recently to see which scheme you guys would like to see me do. Otherwise though, that's it for now, but until the next video, as always, take care and model on.